What if I told you that one of the most beloved voices in Christian music just revealed a truth that millions of fans have been waiting decades to hear? Mark Lowry, the man whose humor and heart helped define an entire generation of gospel music, has finally broken his silence about the Gaither Vocal Band's future, and what he shared will fundamentally change how you understand everything this legendary group represented. This isn't just another celebrity breakup story. This is about the hidden cost of bringing faith and music to millions, the weight of expectation that crushed the joy it was meant to create, and why sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is admit when something sacred has reached its end. By the time you finish hearing this story, you'll understand why the reunion everyone's been praying for would actually dishonor everything the band stood for, and why Mark's honesty about this might be the most powerful ministry he's ever offered. The Gaither Vocal Band wasn't just another Christian music group playing churches on weekends. When Bill Gaither assembled this collection of voices in the late 1980s, he was creating something that would become the gold standard for gospel harmony, a sound so pure and powerful that it transcended denominational walls and reached into the hearts of believers across every theological divide. Mark Lowry stepped into this world with his distinctive tenor voice and an unusual gift that set him apart from every other gospel singer of his generation. He could make you laugh until tears streamed down your face, then pivot seamlessly into a song that would touch the deepest chambers of your soul. That combination of levity and gravity, of humor wrapped around profound faith, became his signature. And it's exactly what made him irreplaceable in the group's dynamic. But here's what most fans never understood about being in the Gaither Vocal Band, and this is crucial to understanding why Mark says they'll never reunite. When you're part of something this significant, this influential, this beloved by millions, you don't just show up and sing songs. You become a vessel for other people's faith, their hope, their spiritual survival. Every night, before every performance, Mark and the other members knew that somewhere in that audience were people holding on by a thread. Someone's marriage was crumbling. Someone had just received a devastating diagnosis. Someone was questioning whether God even existed anymore. And those people came to hear the Gaither Vocal Band because their music had become a lifeline, a reminder that faith could survive the darkness. That's not just performance pressure. That's carrying the spiritual weight of thousands on your shoulders every single time you walk on stage. Mark has described moments standing backstage, hearing the murmur of the crowd gathering, knowing that out there in those seats were people who had driven hours, spent money they probably couldn't afford, all because they needed what the Gaither Vocal Band represented. In those moments, he felt the full magnitude of what they'd created. The songs they sang, classics like Mary Did You Know, which Mark himself wrote, and standard like He Touched Me and Because He Lives, weren't just melodies and lyrics. They had become part of the spiritual fabric of millions of lives, woven into baptisms and funerals, into moments of celebration and seasons of grief. This music lived in hospital rooms and prison cells, in churches packed with believers, and in cars where people drove alone, trying to remember why they believed at all. Understanding this context is essential because it explains why the decision to never reunite isn't about ego or disagreement. It's about recognizing when something has given all it was meant to give. The relentless touring schedule that comes with that level of influence is something most people can't fathom unless they've lived it. Mark wasn't just singing on weekends. The Gaither Vocal Band was on the road constantly, sometimes performing multiple times in a single day, crisscrossing the country in buses and planes, living out of suitcases, eating fast food at midnight after performances, and waking up in hotel rooms where the only way to know what city you were in was to check the notepad by the phone. This wasn't glamorous. It was grinding, exhausting work that wore down even the most passionate performers. The physical toll alone, the lack of sleep, the irregular meals, the constant exposure to different climates and germs, created a baseline of exhaustion that became their normal state of existence. But the physical exhaustion was actually the easier part to manage. What Mark has revealed about the emotional and psychological cost of those years is what really illuminates why reunion is impossible. Imagine missing your child's birthday not once, but year after year, because you're singing about God's love to strangers hundreds of miles away. Picture yourself unable to attend your parents' final days because you're contractually obligated to be on stage bringing hope to people who desperately need it, while your own heart is breaking with the impossibility of being in two places at once. Mark has spoken about the profound guilt that accompanied these moments, the way he would call home from the road and hear the voices of people he loved, people who needed him there, not just on the phone, while he stood in another anonymous hotel room, preparing to go minister to thousands he'd never see again. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, part of a group singing about the importance of faith, family, and God's presence in every moment, while his own presence in the lives of the people closest to him was becoming more and more fragmented. Holidays became performances. Anniversaries were marked by apologetic phone calls, the sacred moments that bind families together. The everyday rituals that create intimacy and belonging were sacrificed again and again on the altar of ministry. And here's the part that really haunted Mark over time. The audiences who received this sacrifice had no idea what it cost. They saw the smiles, heard the harmonies, felt the anointing, and went home blessed, never knowing that the men on stage were paying for their blessing with pieces of their own lives. This creates a psychological dissonance that's almost impossible to sustain long term. Mark found himself in this strange, divided existence where publicly he was Mark Lowry, the funny, faithful, anointed singer with the Gaither Vocal Band, beloved by millions, while privately he was a man struggling with loneliness, guilt, exhaustion, and an increasing sense that the person he projected on stage and the person he was becoming off stage were diverging into two different people. The pressure to maintain that public persona, to always be on, always be funny, always have just the right spiritual insight, to never let the mask slip and reveal the struggling human underneath. That pressure became its own kind of prison. And let's talk about what that does to your relationship with the very thing you're supposed to be celebrating. Mark has been extraordinarily vulnerable about this, and it's one of the most important things he's revealed about why reunion isn't possible. There were times when he would stand on stage, the music swelling around him, the audience on their feet, hands raised in worship, tears streaming down faces, and he would feel absolutely nothing. The songs that once moved him to tears, that once felt like prayers lifted straight from his soul, had become routine. He could sing them perfectly, hit every note, deliver every line with apparent feeling, but inside, he was numb. The well had run dry, and he was drawing from a reservoir that no longer existed. This is what happens when you turn something sacred into something systematic. When what began as worship becomes work, when inspiration gets scheduled and spontaneity gets scripted. Mark wasn't just tired of performing. He was losing his connection to the faith that the music was supposed to express. That's terrifying when your identity, your livelihood, your purpose, and your public image are all wrapped up in being a person of faith. How do you admit that the songs about God's presence aren't stirring your soul anymore? How do you confess that you're going through the motions when millions are counting on you to be authentic? The fear of being exposed as spiritually empty while ministering to others created a level of internal pressure that became unbearable. What Mark has helped people understand is that this wasn't failure. This was actually the natural result of unsustainable expectations, both the ones placed on him by others and the ones he placed on himself. He was trying to be superhuman, to give endlessly without needing to receive, to pour out constantly, without taking time to be refilled, and eventually, inevitably, the math stopped working. You cannot give what you don't have. And he had given everything, until there was nothing left. The joyful, life-giving thing that music and ministry had once been had become the very thing that was draining his life away. The breaking point came not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small realizations that accumulated over time until they could no longer be ignored. Mark began to recognize that he was living with a chronic level of anxiety and dread. The thought of another tour, another performance, another city, instead of exciting him the way it once had, filled him with a sense of heaviness he couldn't shake. He started to notice that his baseline mood had shifted from joy to just trying to get through the day. The humor that came so naturally to him, that was such a fundamental part of his personality, began to feel forced, like he was performing his own life rather than living it. These weren't just signs of burnout that a vacation could fix. These were symptoms of a soul that had been stretched so thin for so long that the fabric was beginning to tear. And this is where Mark's story becomes so important for anyone who's ever felt trapped by their own success, by expectation they can no longer meet, by a life that looks perfect from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. He made the courageous decision to be honest, first with himself, then with his fellow band members, and eventually with the fans who loved the Gaither Vocal Band so much. He admitted that he couldn't keep doing this, that continuing would mean betraying everything the music was supposed to represent, because you can't authentically minister about wholeness and healing when you're falling apart inside. That honesty, that willingness to say, I've given all I can give, and now I need to stop, is actually a more powerful testimony than any song he ever sang. When Mark talks about why the Gaither Vocal Band will never reunite, he's not speaking from bitterness or disappointment. He's speaking from a place of hard-won wisdom and self-awareness. He understands now that what they created together was beautiful and meaningful, and touched millions of lives. And it's also true that it's finished. Both things can be true simultaneously. The temptation to reunite, to recapture that magic, to give the fans what they want is always there. And Mark knows that giving in to that temptation would actually cheapen what they accomplished. It would turn their legacy into a nostalgia act, a greatest hits tour that pretends the intervening years and the reasons they stopped never happened. More importantly, and this is what fans need to understand, attempting to reunite would require the members to go back into the very dynamics and demands that proved unsustainable the first time. The touring schedule wouldn't be easier now that they're older. The emotional labor of carrying people's faith wouldn't be lighter. The personal sacrifices wouldn't be smaller. In fact, everything would likely be harder, because they would be trying to recreate something that existed in a different time of their lives, when they had different energy, different family situations, different relationships with their faith and their art. You can't step into the same river twice, as the saying goes, and trying to resurrect the Gaither Vocal Band as it was would be like trying to step into a river that doesn't exist anymore. Mark has also been clear that the other members of the group have their own lives, their own ministries, their own journeys that have taken them in different directions. Michael English has his own remarkable solo career, and has faced his own very public struggles and redemption. David Phelps continues to tour and has built an incredible legacy as one of the finest vocalists in any genre. Bill Gaither himself, now well into his 80s, has earned the right to step back from the relentless pace that building the Gaither empire required. These men have grown, changed, healed, and moved forward, and asking them to go backward for the sake of fan nostalgia wouldn't honor any of them or what they've become. But here's what makes the Gaither Vocal Band's legacy so powerful. Even in the absence of reunion, the music they created continues to do its work in the world. Every Sunday, somewhere in the world, a church choir is singing one of their songs. Every day, someone discovers their recordings for the first time and finds exactly the message they needed to hear in that moment. The Gaither homecoming videos, those beloved collections of performances that brought together multiple generations of gospel artists, continue to be watched and shared, introducing new audiences to the music and the message. The impact of what the Gaither Vocal Band accomplished doesn't require them to keep performing it. The work has taken on a life of its own and continues to multiply and spread and touch people in ways the original members might never know about. Mark Lowry's own journey since leaving the consistent lineup of the Gaither Vocal Band has been a testimony to what's possible when you're willing to step away from what's familiar and safe to pursue what's authentic and life-giving. His solo career has allowed him to explore different musical styles to write and perform material that's more personally reflective, to control his own schedule in ways that honor his needs and limitations. His speaking engagements, where he combines humor with vulnerable storytelling about faith and doubt, and the messy reality of following God, have connected with people in profound ways precisely because he's not pretending to have it all figured out anymore. He's become a minister of honesty rather than perfection. And there's a power in that which his earlier work, as beautiful as it was, couldn't quite achieve. The question of what comes next for fans of the Gaither Vocal Band isn't really about whether the group will reunite. Mark has made it clear that's not going to happen. And once you understand the reasons why, you realize it shouldn't happen. The real question is whether fans can release their grip on what was and open their hands to receive what is. Can you appreciate the gift of those years without demanding that the gift keep giving beyond its natural lifespan? Can you understand that the men who created that music are real human beings with limits and needs and lives that extend beyond what they provided for you? Can you let go of the fantasy reunion and instead honor what was by allowing it to remain beautifully complete as it is? This is actually a deeply spiritual question that goes far beyond one gospel group. It touches on our relationship with nostalgia, with expectations, with the way we sometimes love things and people more for what they give us than for who they actually are. The fans who truly loved the Gaither Vocal Band, who were genuinely moved by their ministry, have an opportunity now to extend back to those men the same grace and understanding that the music extended to them. That means accepting that the group served its purpose, achieved its mission, and completed its work, and that trying to resurrect it would diminish rather than enhance its legacy. Mark Lowry's honesty about why the Gaither Vocal Band will never reunite is itself a form of ministry, maybe one of the most important he's ever offered. In a world that constantly pressures people to keep performing, keep producing, keep giving beyond their capacity, Mark's willingness to say enough and mean it, to prioritize his own healing and wholeness over fan expectations, is revolutionary. It gives permission to everyone else who's trapped in unsustainable situations to consider that stopping might not be quitting, but might actually be the most faithful thing they can do. It challenges the idea that more is always better, that if something was good once it should be repeated forever, that loyalty means never changing or growing beyond what others need you to be. The future of the Gaither Vocal Band's legacy isn't in reunion tours or new recordings. It's in the lives that were changed by the music they already created, in the artists they influenced and inspired, in the evolution of gospel music that they helped shape, and in the ongoing personal journeys of the men who were part of that group as they continue to grow, serve, and minister in ways that honor who they are now rather than who they were then. Mark Lowry's story is far from over. It's simply entered a new chapter, one where the success isn't measured in album sales or concert attendance, but in authenticity, peace, wholeness, and the courage to live a life that's true to who he actually is rather than who others need him to be. That's the real revelation about the Gaither Vocal Band's future. There isn't one, and that's exactly as it should be. The group gave what it had to give, served the purpose it was meant to serve, and now exists as a beautiful completed work that continues to bless people without requiring its creators to sacrifice themselves endlessly to keep it alive. Understanding this, accepting this, even celebrating this, is how fans can most honor what the Gaither Vocal Band meant and what it accomplished. The greatest tribute isn't demanding reunion, but releasing them with gratitude, carrying forward the message of faith and hope the music represented, while allowing the messengers to rest. That's the shocking truth Mark Lowry has revealed. And once you really understand it, you realize it's not shocking at all. It's simply honest, human, and ultimately more faithful than any forced reunion could ever be. If this story has opened your eyes to the real human cost behind the music we love, then you need to share it with every Gaither Vocal Band fan who's been holding on to hope for a reunion they don't fully understand. Hit that like button right now if you respect Mark Lowry's courage to choose authenticity over expectations. And subscribe, because we're diving deep into more untold stories from Christian music's biggest names. Stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, fame, and the price of ministry. Drop a comment below telling us, have you ever had to walk away from something everyone expected you to continue? Have you ever felt trapped by your own success or by what others needed you to be? Your story matters, and this community needs to hear it. And here's what I want you to do next. Go find one of Mark Lowry's solo performances or speaking engagement from the last few years and really listen to the man he's become, not the performer he was required to be. You'll hear a depth and honesty that could only come from someone who chose healing over applause. Share this video with someone who needs permission to stop, to rest, to choose themselves without guilt. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is simply be honest about our limits. That's the legacy Mark Lowry is living now, and it's worth celebrating. To choose themselves without guilt. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is simply be honest about our limits. That's the legacy Mark Lowry is living now, and it's worth celebrating.